Hey, what's up everyone? DREAGEN back again, here to tell you that you should be reading Salem's Lot. So Salem's Lot is a 1975 horror novel written by Stephen King and takes place in the main town Jerusalem's Lot, which is kind of nicknamed Salem's Lot. And it's essentially a kind of a, I say modern retelling, it's 1975, but a more modern take, a 20th century take, if you will, on kind of Bram Stoker's tale of Dracula, this idea of this kind of affluent vampire, living in a kind of a rural countryside community and essentially kind of just lording over it. And that's essentially what the premise initially for this book was, kind of what Stephen King had kind of envisioned, or rather what his wife had envisioned. Basically, initially he was thinking like, Dracula in modern day would come to New York City and get hit by a cab, and that would be the end of that. Whereas she kind of pointed out saying, well, if you look at Dracula, he was smart. He wasn't, in the middle of like, big city aristocracy. He was smart. He lived out in the countryside where he had anonymity and was basically, ruling over very simple folks, almost like cattle. And it allowed him to kind of go about as you would at his leisure without kind of, the modern world essentially, creeping in on him, because while Dracula is in fact formidable and powerful, he's not unbeatable. And Stoker's classic, it is essentially kind of more modern hunters, more kind of the modern world kind of closing in on him, this ancient lord who just couldn't really compete with the modern day. And yes, I know there's more to the story than just that, but that's just kind of a simplified term. So 20th century, 1975, a Dracula-esque character would probably come into America, would not go into the heart of a major metropolitan city. Rather, he would probably just find a nice rural town way in the middle of nowhere that, unless you're really from that general area, you probably have never heard of, and set up shop there, which he kind of does, literally. He has essentially kind of a human familiar, or kind of a servant who basically are creating this antique shop as a business, and they basically buy this house where this old gangster had killed himself in, and so it kind of has this haunting reputation to it. But no one has seen initially, this business partner until eventually, things start changing. And basically, over the course of the story, people in the town start going missing and coming back as vampires, and rather it being this dramatic, turn of events where suddenly vampires are just roaming through the city, ripping people apart. It is kind of the gradual reduction of this small town. Every day there's just fewer and fewer people, and the people who are still around are just staying indoors at night. The schools are closing down, businesses are closing down because there's just not enough people. And essentially, over this kind of gradual process, the town is becoming a town of the dead. It is becoming a vampire town, just slowly but surely. It's not one fell swoop, it's just a gradual process until basically there's really no one left anymore. Everyone has kind of been turned or killed, essentially. And it's kind of the story where this is happening, over a long period of time, but it's happening in kind of small town America. It goes to show you how when we think of countries, we often think of the larger metropolitan centers. When people outside of America think of America, they often think, hey, New York City, Los Angeles, San Francisco, places like that. When you think of a place like France, well, everyone always just assumes it's Paris. Even though I always try to tell people that there's a lot more to France than just Paris. England, London, Russia, Moscow, Japan, Tokyo. Everyone always just thinks of like these major cities, and they, not that they don't know or they forget, but they just don't really think about that these are just areas, small places in a much larger country, and that there are a lot of places in these countries that are kind of off the map, that are off the beaten path, that unless you're really from there, you don't really know about it. So if you were looking to kind of, basically convert an entire community into, being like vampires, again, you're not going to go to like Los Angeles, because a bunch of vampires start showing up in LA. People are going to notice, unless it's this situation like Blade where they're part of the politics and the government. But if you were just a single vampire and you wanted to just turn a community of people, if you start doing that in Harlem or Queens or Malibu, place, people are going to notice pretty damn quick. And again, that modern world is going to close in on you. It doesn't matter how immortal you are, what kind of supernatural powers you are. There is a science can devise a way to combat you, and science will equip soldiers with this way, and they'll storm your castle or your Malibu house, and make quick work of you. You'll have the vampire hunting equivalent of SEAL Team 6, kick down your front door and stake you in your coffin, basically. So that's not the way to go. You're going to want to go to a small mountain community, a rural village, a small town in Maine, places where the eyes of the world are not looking at. It's places of the world where, people from every which way don't know about and don't really care to know about, because it's not someplace that anyone really cares to go, and that's including people in America. I used to live in Vermont, and I can't tell you how many times when I moved back to California, and I would tell people I'm from Vermont, they'd ask me, what state is that in? So there you go. Which, by the way, for those who may not know, Vermont is a state. Okay, it's not a town, it's not a city, it's not a village. It's an actual state in New England. But there was a lot of people who, weirdly enough, didn't know that. So this is really kind of a story about how evil, or rather just malevolent forces can kind of creep in, and that we always expect that we can never be caught unawares in such a way, because we believe that we would see it, we would spot it. There's no way something like a vampire could take root in any kind of American community and have us not know. But again, we always assume that, like the rest of the world, a vampire from abroad, naturally they're going to want to go to a big city, because when you again go abroad, when people think of America, they think of the big cities. They think of the stuff they see in movies and TV, the stuff that they see in magazines. That's the part of America wants to promote. That's the part of any country a country wants to promote. They want to promote the what am I trying to say? Kind of the forefront of culture. Cultural centers, and those are always big cities. No one wants to show off America by showing them some small town in Nebraska. Nothing against any of you who live in Nebraska, but if you're trying to make America alluring to tourism or outside investors, or you're going to want to show them the glitz, the glamour. That's just the way it is, and and every country is guilty of this. Again, it's why whenever I tell people I go to France, they always ask me, how was Paris? I'm like, I don't know. I've literally never been to Paris. I haven't been past the damn airport. I'm from Nice. That's down south. But that's the thing, and sadly enough, the only time Nice has really been in the news in recent years was during the terrorist attack, and that's something when a lot of people realize that Nice exists, unfortunately. But that goes to show you is that really it's, this character, this vampire that is using kind of this kind of false image that America kind of projects of itself to kind of get around the security, get around the institutions we have in place to, in theory, prevent something like that from happening. Because again, whenever we watch usually movies and stories, we always see the vampire is a threat, and it's usually taking place in a more interesting location, because there's more to do in a place like Los Angeles than a small town in Maine. But realistically, if you're being strategic, unless you're all powerful and undefeatable, then yeah, sure, you can just come up shore and just destroy the Golden Gate Bridge and storm San Francisco, and doesn't matter what we throw at you, you can't be beaten. That's why giant monsters destroy major cities, and werewolves and stuff, they tend to hide in the forest and the woods of some small backwards town, because if you threw a werewolf in the middle of Times Square, you can just get a bunch of police officers with shotguns loaded with silver bullets, and there you go. Same thing with a bunch of vampires. You get a bunch of cops with stakes in their hands and just rush in, like, there you go. But if you don't know what's there, and the interesting about this story is that as this is going on, the outside world has no idea, because the outside world isn't paying attention to this town. So essentially, in America, yours is town that is literally, over the course of a long period of time, just basically being converted over into a town of the undead. And it's just happening, and there's really no one doing anything about it. You have our principal characters who know about it and fighting against it, but they're kind of fighting a losing battle, and they know it, because again, short of the military getting involved, then who's going to believe that? Who's going to believe in 1975 that A, vampires are real, and B, that they're taking over a town in Maine? It just sounds far-fetched. And anyone in a position to do anything about it would react to it much the same way you would probably react if someone told you, hey, that's actually happening. Like if I told you right now, Salem's Lot's based on a true story about a real town that got taken over by vampires, you would look at me and say, bullshit. And which is why a vampire like that would target a small town like that, because they know that any rumors of any talk of something like that happening would be treated with, would be met with a lot of mistrust. Now, granted, this is 1975, and in 2019, we have methods of communication that did not exist. We have the internet now. So, in theory, people could be tweeting and, hashtagging things and putting pictures on Instagram. So now it'd be interesting to see how a story like this would take place today. But still, with Photoshop and CGI, people are able to kind of deep fakes now. Even with this technology that could be, you could live stream a vampire attack now on YouTube if you wanted to. But again, with all this technology that allows us to kind of create false imagery, the irony is most people wouldn't believe it. Even though now we have technology to kind of, metaphorically speaking, shine a light on something like this, most people wouldn't believe it now because of all the technology we have, because most people would just say, hey, that's fake. Someone made that. That's not a vampire, that's a deep fake. That's not real blood. That's something someone did in a program somewhere. And to be fair, probably could be. You see what people can do now on their computers by themselves. What used to take a whole team of visual effects artists back in the 90s, a single person with the right software can do it now on their laptop at home. So even with all this technology, at the end of the day, unless you're actually seeing it with your own eyes, a lot of people wouldn't believe it. So if a aristocratic, super old, super powerful vampire from the old world wanted to come to America and infiltrate it, it would not be New York City, it would not be Atlanta, Georgia, it would not be San Francisco, it would not be Seattle, it wouldn't be St. Louis, it wouldn't be Chicago. It would be some town you and I probably have never heard of, that the people in the area would be not cut off from the world, but are not the kind of people who venture out into the world. They don't go vacationing here and there. They're born, they live, and they die in that town. That is it. So they don't really have a lot of outside contact with the world to begin with. And the little bit that they would have now via technology would be discounted just as quickly as, something that's fake, a false thing. And before anyone really took notice, if they ever did, the seizure of the town, this community, would be well underway, if not already completed. And now you would have a active vampire population, not just in this town, but possibly now in this part of the world, assuming they weren't already, roaming bands of vampires already existing in America. So we don't know. So that's kind of the interesting thing about Salem's Lot. It is kind of the whole notion that something like this could happen right under our noses, because it would happen in the corners of our own backyard that we don't look at. Again, we don't look to these little places for something like this to happen, because again, what has popular culture taught us? That these kinds of things don't happen in rural America. They happen, the same place that monsters attack and knock over buildings, the same place that, flying saucers, shoot laser guns and blow up. They happen in the big cities. That's where all this stuff happens. So that's where we're looking for vampires. That's where we're looking for the modern day Count Dracula. Modern day Count Dracula is going to be some, CEO in some penthouse apartment, top of New York skyline. That's Dracula. Not some guy who bought some shitty old house way out in Maine, somewhere in a town that no one's ever heard of. Why would Dracula do that? Well, or the equivalent of Dracula. Well, he would do that because we're not looking for him there. And that's probably how he has survived all this time, is by operating in the shadows, by operating behind the scenes, by doing what he does in places where we're not looking. And that's how he continues to get away with it. So it's an interesting story, and it kind of makes you wonder, what's really going on out there. Like when you maybe if you're driving cross country on a trip and you pass through one of those small little towns, and if you've driven, through countries, especially in the United States, we've seen them. We recently saw that when we drove from Ohio to Washington State, and boy, there was a lot of little places where I'm like, damn, if everyone in this town suddenly just disappeared overnight, it'd be a long time before any of us would know about it. So I don't know, it makes you wonder what's really going on, what's really going on beyond, the lights of the big city, in the dark corners of, rural America, or just whatever country you live in, quite frankly, outside of what's going on outside of London, what's going outside of Tokyo, what's going outside of, Berlin, what's going on out there, in the forest, and those little tiny places that, don't even register to you on the map, that might not even be on the map. It makes you think, and it makes you, maybe fear the dark a little bit more, which is what's always fun about these kinds of stories, and something that Stephen King is certainly not opposed to trying to make us do. But anyway, that's going to do it for this one. So, Salem's Lot. Have you read it? If so, what did you think? If not, I will put a link in the description section below where you can pick it up, check it out, come back, give me some of your thoughts. Always, I'd like to know what you guys think. And as always, I will catch you in the next one. Peace!